She said it the way you might mention the weather. Casual. Almost bored. My daughter stood in the doorway of my own kitchen, arms crossed, and told me that if I didn't sign the house over to her and her husband, they would make my life so difficult I would beg to leave. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She had been practicing that tone for months. I poured my coffee. I nodded slowly, and I said, "Let me think about it." What she didn't know was that I had already been thinking about it. For 6 months, I had been thinking about almost nothing else. My name is Dorothy. I am 67 years old. I was married for 31 years to a man named Gerald, who built our home with his own hands on a half-acre lot in central Virginia. Gerald passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and merciless, the way that disease tends to be. He was gone 11 weeks after the diagnosis. I held his hand at the end, and when it was over, I sat in that hospital room for a long time before I could make myself stand up and walk out. The house was mine. Gerald had made sure of that. He was a careful man, a quiet man, and he had spent the last weeks of his life getting his affairs in order with the same methodical patience he applied to everything. The deed was in my name. The will was clear. Our financial advisor had helped us set up a simple trust. Gerald had wanted me to be protected. He said that to me directly. Lying in that hospital bed, the TV muted in the corner. "I need to know you'll be protected, Dot." I told him I would be fine. He made me promise to call the lawyer if anything ever felt wrong. I kept that promise. It just took me longer than I expected. My daughter's name is Renee. She is 41 years old, and she is, in many ways, still the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms and press her face against my shoulder. I say that not to excuse anything she did, but because I think it matters. I loved her completely. I still do, though love is a complicated thing when someone has shown you what they're capable of. Renee married a man named Craig 7 years ago. Craig is not a bad-looking man. He has good teeth and a firm handshake, and he laughs at his own jokes a half-second before anyone else does. Gerald never trusted him. He told me once, quietly, over the dishes after a Sunday dinner, "That man keeps score, Dot. You watch." I remembered that later. I wish I had remembered it sooner. The first 2 years of their marriage, things were fine. Renee and Craig had their own apartment 40 minutes away. They came for holidays. We talked on the phone on Sundays. It was a normal life, a good life. I was adjusting to being alone, which is something no one warns you about properly. It's not just the absence of a person, it's the absence of a rhythm. Gerald and I had a rhythm. Without him, I had to build a new one from scratch, and I was still building it when Renee called and asked if they could move in temporarily. Craig had lost his job. That was how she explained it. The word temporarily was used 4 times in that phone call. I counted, though not on purpose. They needed a few months to save up, to get back on their feet. My house had 3 bedrooms. I was living alone. Of course I said yes. That was 22 months before my daughter stood in my kitchen and told me to sign over my home. The first few months were unremarkable. They paid a small amount toward groceries. They kept their space reasonably clean. Craig was applying for jobs, or said he was. Renee had her own income from her work as a dental hygienist, which was steady, so I didn't worry too much about the finances. I cooked most nights. We ate together sometimes. It wasn't unpleasant. I noticed the first shift around month 4. It was a Saturday morning. I had come downstairs to find that the furniture in the living room had been rearranged. My reading chair, a wingback that Gerald had reupholstered himself the summer before he got sick, had been moved to the corner behind the door. In its place was a large, sectional sofa they had brought from storage, taking up most of the room. Renee was in the kitchen making eggs. She said brightly, without turning around, I hope you don't mind. We just needed a little more space. I stood in the doorway and looked at Gerald's chair pushed into the corner, and I said, "Of course, no problem." I moved the chair back that afternoon when they went out. 2 days later, it was in the corner again. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was a small thing. It was a small thing. But small things have a way of being the first word of a sentence that takes a long time to finish. By month 7, Craig had found work. Part-time, he said. Freelance. I was never entirely clear on what he did, only that it didn't seem to require leaving the house very often. He set up a home office in the second bedroom, which had been my sewing room. He asked first, which I appreciated, and I said it was fine while my heart quietly said something different. I packed my sewing machine and my fabric bins into the closet of my own bedroom and told myself that was fine too. Renee began referring to the house differently around that time. Not dramatically. Just a slight shift in language. She would say "our home" when talking to friends on the phone. She would tell Craig, within my earshot, we should repaint the hallway. We, not we including me. A different we. I heard it and I filed it away. I was filing away a great many things by then. The issue with the debt came up in month 11. I came home from my Thursday morning water aerobics class to find Renee sitting at the kitchen table with a folder full of papers and an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something tight, something that had been rehearsed. Craig was standing near the counter, with his arms folded in the way of a man trying to appear casual and not succeeding. Renee told me that she and Craig had a financial situation. She used that word, situation. She said that Craig's previous business venture, the one before the job he lost, had left some unresolved obligations. She said the total amount was $280,000. She said this while looking directly at me, with those eyes I had known since she was 3 minutes old. I sat down. I asked her to explain what she meant by unresolved obligations. She explained. It took a while. The short version was that Craig had been a partner in a small real estate investment firm that had collapsed, and there were debts attached to that collapse that had not been fully discharged, and creditors had recently begun making contact again. She was telling me because, she said, some of the paperwork had begun arriving at my address. And also because, she said, there was something else I needed to know. She slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a letter from a collections firm. The name at the top of the letter was not Craig's name. It was mine. It was my name, with my address, and a figure of $14,000 associated with a credit account I had never opened. I looked at that paper for a long time. Then I looked at my daughter. I said, "Renee, explain this to me." She explained that. It took even longer. The summary was that 18 months earlier, before they had moved in with me, Craig had opened a credit account in my name. He said he had intended to pay it off quickly and close it before I ever found out. He said it had spiraled. He said he was sorry. He did not look particularly sorry. He looked like a man who had calculated his odds and decided that honesty, at this particular moment, was the best remaining strategy. I sat at my kitchen table, in my kitchen, in my house, and I listened to my daughter explain to me that my son-in-law had stolen my identity to open a credit account, that there were creditors now potentially attaching my name to his debts, and that they were asking me if I was willing, if I might consider putting the house in a joint trust. They had already spoken to someone about the paperwork, which would, among other things, provide some protection from the creditors. For all of us, she said. For everyone, I said. Let me think about it. Renee blinked. She had expected something else. Tears, perhaps. Anger. Collapse. She had expected the face of a woman who had just been knocked down and didn't know how to stand up. She had known me my whole life, and she had somehow misread me entirely. I said I was tired. and I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed in the afternoon light, and I thought about Gerald. I thought about him standing in the kitchen 30 years ago, teaching Renee how to make biscuits, flour on both of them laughing. I thought about what he had said to me in the hospital. I need to know you'll be protected. I called the lawyer the next morning. His name was Raymond, and he had handled Gerald's estate, and he had known our family for 15 years. I met him at his office downtown, not at my house, which felt important. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the qualities I have always appreciated in him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Dorothy, how much do you know about the deed situation?" I told him I believed the deed was still entirely in my name, per Gerald's arrangements. He said, "Good. Don't sign anything. Don't change anything. And don't tell them you've called me." I asked him what he thought I should do. He told me. It took about 40 minutes. When I walked out of that office and sat in my car, I felt something I had not felt in nearly 2 years of slow and steady encroachment. I felt solid, like the ground under me had been tested and had held. I didn't change anything at home right away. That was deliberate. Raymond had advised me to continue normally, to not signal anything, while he verified the full extent of what had been done with my name and what could be undone. The credit account turned out to be one of 3. Craig had been more thorough than Renee had let on, or possibly more thorough than Renee had known. Raymond was working with a second attorney who specialized in fraud recovery. It was going to take a few months. I needed to be patient. I am a patient woman. Gerald used to say I had the patience of someone who understood that time was always working, even when they weren't. During those months, the pressure at home increased. Renee brought up the joint trust 3 more times. Each time I said I was still thinking about it, that I wanted to understand it fully before I signed anything, that I was old-fashioned about these things. She accepted this, though less gracefully each time. Craig began avoiding rooms I was in, which suited me. He would go quiet when I entered the kitchen, occupy himself suddenly with his phone. The morning Renee stood in the doorway and told me directly no more gentleness, no more just a suggestion that I needed to sign the papers or they would have to make changes I might not like. I had been waiting for it. Not hoping for it, waiting for it the way you wait for a storm you've watched building on the horizon for days. She said that if I wasn't willing to help protect the family, then maybe it made more sense for me to think about other living arrangements. She said that at 67, living alone in a big house wasn't really practical anyway. She said they had looked into some options for me. She said all of this with a kind of practiced calm that told me Craig had coached her. His language, her mouth. I poured my coffee. I nodded slowly. I said, "Let me think about it." That evening, while they were watching television, I went upstairs and I packed one suitcase. Not frantically, carefully. The way you pack when you know exactly where you're going. I had already arranged to stay with my friend Patricia, who lived 20 minutes away, and who had been told enough of the situation to know that I might need her guest room on short notice. I had moved the most important documents, the deed, Gerald's will, our financial records, the trust paperwork, the new documents Raymond had prepared to a fireproof box at Patricia's house 3 weeks earlier, on a Thursday afternoon when Renee was at work, and Craig was doing whatever Craig did when he left the house. I came downstairs with my suitcase. They were still watching television. The sectional sofa was where Gerald's chair used to be. Renee looked at the suitcase. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to stay with Patricia for a little while." She said, "What? Why?" "Mom, we need to talk about the papers." I said, "I know. We will." I picked up my keys from the hook by the door. I just need a little space to think. I drove to Patricia's house. I did not look in the rearview mirror once. The next 6 weeks were quieter than anything I had experienced in nearly 2 years. Patricia had a garden, and she made good soup, and we sat on her porch in the evenings and talked about everything and nothing. I slept well for the first time in months. I hadn't realized how much of my sleep the house had been taking from me until I was somewhere that felt safe. Raymond called me at the end of the 3rd week. He said everything was ready. The credit accounts Craig had opened in my name had been formally disputed and were in the process of being investigated for fraud. A police report had been filed. Raymond had guided me through that, and I had done it quietly, without announcement. The fraud attorney had sent formal notices to the relevant creditors. My credit, which Craig had damaged without my knowledge, was in the process of being restored. And then there were the other letters. Raymond had prepared them, and they were sent certified mail to my house, which was still my house, which had always been my house, and which, as of a revision made to Gerald's trust arrangement several months earlier, completed quietly, legally, on a Tuesday afternoon, in Raymond's office, had specific provisions regarding any attempt to transfer ownership without the sole trustee's written consent. I was the sole trustee. The letters arrived on a Thursday. I know this because Renee called me that evening. She called 4 times within an hour. I let the calls go to voicemail. Craig called once. I let that go too. I called Renee back the following morning. She answered on the first ring. I could hear in her voice that she had not slept. I had some feelings about that. They were complicated feelings, the kind that come when you love someone, and you are also clear-eyed about what they have done. She started talking quickly. She said the letters were confusing. She said she didn't understand the legal language. She said that their attorney, apparently they had retained one, which Raymond had anticipated, had told them that the trust provisions were airtight. She said Craig was saying that Raymond must have made errors. She said this with less conviction than she would have said it 2 days earlier. I let her talk. When she finished, I said, "Renee, your father spent the last weeks of his life making sure I would be protected. He trusted me to protect what he built. I kept that promise to him." She was quiet. I said, "The house is mine. It will remain mine. The accounts Craig opened in my name are being handled by the proper authorities, and that process will take its course regardless of anything else." I paused. "I would like for you and Craig to find alternative living arrangements within the next 60 days. Raymond's office will be in touch with the formalities." She started to say something. I said, "I love you. I will always love you. And when you are ready to have an honest conversation without Craig in the room, I will be here for that." Then I said goodbye, and I ended the call. I sat in Patricia's kitchen with my coffee going cold in front of me, and I thought about Gerald's chair, pushed into the corner behind the door. I thought about the first Sunday morning I noticed it and said nothing. I thought about all the Sunday mornings after that, all the small erosions, all the careful nodding, and the patient waiting, and the phone call I finally made, and the 40 minutes in Raymond's office when the ground tested solid under me. I moved back into my home 6 weeks later. Renee and Craig were gone. They had taken their sectional sofa. They had left some things behind, not maliciously, I think, just the leftover disorder of a quick departure. I cleaned the house top to bottom. It took 2 days. On the evening of the second day, I moved Gerald's wingback chair back to its place by the window, where the afternoon light came in and the street was visible and the room felt the way it was supposed to feel. I sat in it for a long time without doing anything else. There is something people say about forgiveness, that it is something you do for yourself. I have been thinking about that. I am not at a place of full forgiveness yet. I think that is honest, and I think honesty matters more to me now than it ever has before. Renee has sent messages. A few have been defensive. A few have been something that almost resembled sorry. I read them all. I respond to some of them. I am not in a hurry. What I know is this: I spent 31 years building a life with a man who loved me carefully and well. I spent 4 years learning how to live inside the shape that love left behind when he was gone. And I spent 22 months watching something try to take what he left me. Slowly, politely, one small encroachment at a time. I am 67 years old. I have Gerald's chair by the window. I have Raymond's number in my phone. I have Patricia's soup on Sunday evenings, and my water aerobics on Thursday mornings, and a garden that needs attention, and a house that is, in every way that matters, mine. I did not disappear because I was afraid. I disappeared because I had already done the work. And sometimes the quietest exit is the one that leads somewhere worth going. The letters arrived on a Thursday. And when they did, I was already in Patricia's garden, drinking my coffee, watching the light change. I had been ready for a long time. If you are watching this, and something in this story sounds familiar, I want to say something to you directly. Get your documents in order. Know what your name is attached to. Call the lawyer your husband told you to call, or the one you have always meant to find. Do not wait for the moment in the kitchen doorway. Do it before that moment comes, quietly, on a Tuesday afternoon, when no one is paying attention. Gerald knew something I had to learn the hard way. Protection is not something that happens to you. It is something you build, and you can build it gently and without anger, and still build it strong enough to hold. Thank you for being here with me on Spirit Tales. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. I'll be here next time.